In this video, we'd like to talk about how to run a growth equation session with a client. Let's frame growth equation for you. This is a planning tool. It enables you to focus on some really important numbers, some of which are, let's call them accounting numbers, so numbers that you would find on the profit and loss account, and some of which you might refer to as numbers that come from the language of business. So sometimes an area where accountants often don't get too involved with their clients. The great thing about growth equation is that the step-by-step approach will guide you through the right questions to ask so that you're able to present your client with a plan that makes sense for their business. What's important to understand is that very few clients, very few business owners think about or understand what drives revenue and profit and enterprise value in their business. In fact, what they do tend to think about if they do any planning is, well, what did we achieve last year, and what if we could achieve a 5% increase next year, something in that order. But often they're not aware of how they can achieve that. And even when they are, what they often neglect to figure out is, where should I focus for maximum impact? Before you start going into the process with your clients, it's important to have a discussion with the client about what's important to them. What are their goals? You might, in fact, run a strategized session with the client before you get into growth equation to understand better whether revenue or profit, or indeed value, for those clients who are considering a succession or sale of their business, are the most important to them. In this particular case that we're going to describe today, let's assume that the client says, well, profit is the most important thing for me right now. And so with that knowledge, we simply give the plan a name. We'll just call it the Profit Improvement Plan. So now we continue to the next step. What we're going to do here is to take a look at the current state of the business, and we'll start with revenue. So in any business, revenue is derived from existing customers, but also there'll be some revenue derived from new customers. And you'd already start to get a sense of what some of those key drivers that I mentioned are. So in the first section there, you see, how many customers do we have? That's an interesting question to ask any of your clients. Sometimes you'll find that they don't know, and even going in and finding out that information for them could be valuable. So we'll make some assumptions here, and we'll just go through a demonstration as to how this pans out and what it would look like, and the way in which you might interact with your client on each of the screens. So starting with revenue from existing customers, the first question then is, how many existing customers do you have? And you'll see all through the application that there are little I marks for information that will give you more an idea as to what's required in that box. There are also little videos that you'll find which you can open and pop up. And so if you're working with one of your accountants, one of your team members, and in a training session, they're not sure what should go into that box, they can open the video and get a good sense as to how they would engage with the client in that particular area. We're going to assume in this case that there are 300 customers in our particular client business. And then the next question is, what's the current average amount of revenue per existing customer per year? And you might have access to these numbers. If your client is on a cloud accounting system, for example, you could easily get access to these numbers. And in fact, you should be doing that, I think, for any client for whom you're considering an advisory relationship. Let's assume that in this particular case, each customer contributes on average $8,000 in annual revenue to this particular business. The next question is around churn. So by churn, we mean how many clients leave during the course of a year, how many customers leave. All businesses will lose customers for a variety of reasons. And the key to understanding how many is get a sense for the percentage customer attrition. And the client might often not be measuring that. And so what you might say to the client there is, well, in any business where no real focus is placed on customer retention, you might find that 10 to 20% of customers would leave during any given 12-month period. And so perhaps we go with 10% in this particular case. Next, we turn our attention to, remember I mentioned the language of business, we turn our attention now to some of the drivers that perhaps are not quite so obvious to you as the client's accountant or advisor. The first question asks how many sales opportunities arise during a typical 12-month period where you're generating new opportunities or leads in the business. Once again, many business owners won't be tracking that, and if that's what they say to you, a good response is, well, as we work more closely with you, this is exactly the sort of important driver of revenue that we'll have you measure. And then perhaps you get a best estimate from the client as to what that might be. Perhaps they say, well, it could be 10 a month, and so let's use 120 in a year. Our second question in this area on revenue from new customers relates to sales conversion rate. So the question here is, every time you get in front of a prospect, how many times out of 10 do you convert that prospect into a customer? And perhaps the client says, I'm not sure, but perhaps it's 50%. So that means we have 60 new customers generated during the course of the year. Now we're asking the clients about revenue from new customers. And in some businesses, you may observe that revenue from new customers is more than revenue from existing customers. Perhaps there's legacy pricing with existing customers. Perhaps there's an opportunity to add in more products or services with new customers. In other cases, it'll be the same sort of average fee or average revenue, irrespective of whether this is an existing customer or a new customer. Let's say in this case, it's exactly the same, so $8,000 per new customer. So now we've got a breakdown of the revenue in this business. We see 2.1 million from existing customers, just short of $500,000 from new customers. This is a $2.6 million business in terms of revenue. We go to our next screen, and now we're squarely in the realm of accounting talk. And so what we're looking for here is to understand the percentage cost of goods sold for this particular business. We'll assume it's 60%. And then the other expenses in the business, excluding cost of goods sold, how much do we spend here just to keep the doors open? And perhaps it's 800,000. And once again, as the accountant for the client or the advisor to the client, you'll have access to these numbers, and you may choose to pre-fill some of these boxes if you wish. But it's a good idea still to talk this through with the client, because every time the client learns something that they previously didn't know about their business, then you're creating some value for them. So in total, we have 2.3, almost $2.4 million in costs. And so we can then look at the current state of the business being 2.6 in revenue, 2.4 in costs, $250,000 in profit in this business. And remember, the client said that profit was the most important issue for them to improve in their business. At the bottom of the screen here in section 8, we look at valuation. Now, this is not a formal valuation. So this is a discussion point. So John, Mary, when you come to sell your business, it might be valued in a variety of different ways, one of which might be a multiple of revenue, another of which could be a multiple of net profit. And some businesses tend to be valued around 1 times revenue, some around 3 times profit. And so we can see a range as to where the value of your business might be today. Now, the client might say to you, you know, in our industry, we know that businesses are valued at 5 times profits. And if that's the case, then you can change those numbers. Next, we move on to looking at the business opportunities. Where are the improvement opportunities in the business? And down the left-hand side here, you'll see 7 key drivers of revenue, profit, and enterprise value. These are the drivers that I mentioned right at the start of this video, where clients are very rarely focused and they rarely understand what's important to focus on to increase revenue and profit. So those 7 drivers are revenue per existing customer. How much does a customer pay during the course of a year to the business? Percentage churn, what proportion of customers leave or period? Lead generation, how many new opportunities are there during a typical year to generate new customers? Sales conversion rate, what proportion of those leads convert into customers? Average revenue per new customer, cost of goods sold, and then expenses. In the center, you see the current situation for the business. This is where we are right now. And now our job is to work in the right-hand column and have the client set targets for each of those key drivers. So the way we do that is simply to have a conversation with the client. So John, Mary, let's start with revenue per existing customer. Right now, you're sitting at around about $8,000. If you really focused on that, what ideas do you have that would help you improve that number? And then let the client give you a few ideas. If they come up with the ideas and they're closest to their business, and they will be able to do that, they're more likely to own the number that they set as a target. And perhaps the client says, well, you know, we could increase prices. We've not done that for 3 or 4 years. Or there's an opportunity to sell an additional product to some of the customers. Whatever it is, let them then come up with a number. And perhaps they say, let's see if we can increase that to $9,000. We do the same sort of questioning technique with each of those drivers. And so we won't labor the point here, but percentage churn, well, perhaps we aim to shave a percentage point off that. Lead generation. So right now we're getting around about 10 leads a month, we think. With more focus, more marketing effort, what would a good target be to increase to in the next 12 months? And maybe the client says, let's see if we can increase that by 50% to 180. Sales conversion rate, currently running at around about 50%. They may or may not be measuring that. With some focus on that, what do you think you could increase that to? And sometimes you may need to prime the pump. The client might say, well, how would we do that? And you might respond, well, the first thing we need to do is to measure that number so that we're sure that that is the right number. And then what we'll do is we'll start to drill down a little bit. So what's the sales conversion rate by product? What's the sales conversion rate by salesperson? What's the sales conversion rate by different channels? So if leads come from different channels, different places, is there any observed difference between the way in which we convert leads from one channel? Maybe warm referrals convert at a higher rate than those from marketing, direct marketing campaigns. Once the client's got the idea, they'll say, well, that makes some sense. Perhaps we aim for 60% here as the target. Average revenue per new customer, let's go with the same number as we had for existing customers at the top. And then cost of goods sold, what we recommend you do here is take a look at the last 4 or 5 years and figure out what the best result was there for cost of goods sold. And you might find the number goes up and down somewhat, and perhaps there's evidence that in the not too distant past, the client achieved 58% as cost of goods sold. So let's target that number again. And then expenses. Most businesses can shave some expenses out of their business if they really focus on that. And your client is likely to recognize that. And if they do, they might say, well, perhaps there's $20,000 that we could take out in cost. And so now we have targets for each of those 7 key areas. And what we can now do is to look at the potential of this business. And so in the left-hand column here under current is where the business is now. Remember, a $2.6 million business with a $256,000 profit. And now if we can achieve the targets that we nominated, what have we got in potential? Well, if we could do everything that we said on the previous screen, the business will do $3.4 million in revenue with $2.7 million in cost, and a profit of $660,000. So that's a 158% increase. Now remember, the client said that profit was the most important to them out of revenue and profits and business value. And so now we're in a really interesting discussion with the client. So how do you feel about that number? And the client's likely to say, wow, that sounds terrific. How do we do that? And at the bottom here, we can see some indicative valuations, assuming that we can achieve those targets. But here's the thing. Most business owners can't do everything at once. And so it's really important that we get them focused. So what we can now do is go one step further. And in this next step, we'll be able to key contributor to either revenue or profit or business value. So this is really important information for business owners who are time poor and can only focus on a small number of things. So let's click on next and see what happens here. So we're going to go straight to profit because that's where our clients said they were most interested. And what you can see here is down the bottom, percentage churn, expenses, average revenue per customer. If you look in the right-hand column here, the increases that can be achieved are pretty incremental, so we really shouldn't be focused there. Similarly, sales conversion rate. And perhaps if the client were to do just 3 things, they'd focus on revenue per existing customer, which alone would add 108,000 to the bottom line, and lead generation, which alone would add 96,000 to the bottom line. And cost of goods sold, that 2% is worth $53,000 in profits to the business. And so now we can get very, very focused. And depending on the bandwidth available to the client, you might choose 2 or 3 of those drivers to focus on, or perhaps you just focus on one in the next 12 months. And if it were just one, then clearly you'd be looking at revenue per existing customer. And now the conversation we're having with the client is, well, what should we be doing here? What should we focus on to increase revenue per existing customer? And, you know, that's a great question to ask. And the beauty of this is that now we can link through to content that can help you help the client. So there are different types of content that you'll find here in the Learning Hub, and this content exists for all of the drivers. First of all, for each driver, there's an orientation. And so this is particularly helpful for younger people coming up through your organization who you want to get involved in advisory. What it does is it explains the rationale behind why it's even important to be talking about this particular driver. And then what you can do with this knowledge, and then for each of the drivers an exercise. And so you can either do the exercise with the clients, or you might do this internally as a case study with a couple of clients as a training exercise with your team. What we can then do is go to what we call best practices. And the best practices, which again exist for each of those drivers, what they do is they list out good ideas that you can take to the client. And so in this particular case, you'll see that there's a whole range of different ideas as to what you could do to increase revenue per existing customer. For example, develop and implement a pricing strategy, and then the rationale that sits behind that. Classify clients, because there might be an opportunity to increase revenue from some clients, but we could be focused too much on others where there's no opportunity to increase revenue. Perhaps a client communication plan, if we figure that some customers don't understand everything that the business can do. Perhaps we look at pursuing sales opportunities in a more systematic way. Perhaps there are opportunities there, but they're being missed. And then you'll find another page of those over here. So review and improve the capabilities of the team as regards client interaction, and then processes as regards client interaction, and then perhaps use of technology could be interesting as well. So what this means is every time you consider a driver, you then have access to content to help you. That's really, really important. We think there are 3 revenue opportunities for you as the advisor with your clients once you can get them focused on where they should be applying some attention. The first one is to go to that particular driver and find some numbers connected with it. And so, for example, in the case of revenue per existing customer, you might then look at various different segments. You might start to classify the customers and then break down the revenue per existing customer by client or customer sector. That might give you some really important insights. Perhaps the seasonality involved here as well. Perhaps you find that some products are very profitable or generate high revenue, whereas other products generate low revenue, and that could relate to lower profitability as well. And so as an accountant close to the numbers, we can often find a project that involves getting deeper into the client's numbers, doing some analysis, and presenting a report and a recommendation back to the clients. But what you might also do is get involved in a particular project. So you might agree with the client that they focus on one of those best practices. You can help them on behalf of the clients. That's the second revenue stream. And then the third revenue stream is, let's imagine the client says, this is terrific, I love those best practices, I'm going to choose a couple of those and I'll implement them on my own, I'm comfortable that I can do that. Then your response might be, well, that's fine, but remember, sometimes we commit to doing things, but don't do the things that we said we were going to do. And with some of our clients, we found we've been able to play a really important role by putting accountability in place. And so what we do with those clients is we meet with you on a monthly or a quarterly basis. And we look at what you said you were going to do. We check off everything that you have done, and where you haven't done something, then we'll hold you accountable to that, but also we'll measure the results and then agree with you what you're going to do next as you work towards this goal. So that's an important role. So 3 different revenue streams. Find some data connected with the driver, do some analysis, present a report and some recommendations. That's number 1. Number 2, you implement a project based on a best practice on behalf of the client. Number 3, you play the role of the accountability partner to keep the client honest. What you can also do here is as you're going through the meeting with the client, you can take some notes in this particular space here as to the conversation that you're having. And any notes that you take will come through in a report which you can download. And that report will summarize everything that you've gone through with the client. So the numbers, the current state of the business, the targets that you set with that particular client, and the tables that you see on the screen, as well as the charts that you're seeing there as well. And you'll have that for profit. You'll also have that for revenue, and you'll have that also for the valuation, whether that's driven by profit or revenue. And you'll notice that the difference here is in terms of the size of the number here. So if we've applied a multiple to profit, for example, and that multiple is 3, then the potential change will be 3 times what you saw on the profit table. And so I'll just open the report for you here. You'll see this is branded. You'll have your logo right in there. It's rendered in Microsoft Word. You can go in, you can make changes to all of that. Any notes that you made will appear in that box there. And so you've got your tables and your charts and so on. And you can send that as a deliverable to the clients once you've finished the meeting. So hopefully this is useful for you. And we really encourage you, firstly, to test this out internally. So pick a client and do some work internally on that with your team to become familiar with the tool. And then pick a friendly client, get in front of them and take them through a growth equation session and see where you get to. We think there are lots and lots of opportunities here for you to deliver advisory services to your clients. And we wish you well with Growth Equation. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye for now.